Oh, yeah. So we highlight someone from agriculture, talk about this, files, so like that. Yeah. Where's we got Are we on there? Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. As always, how about
Isn't the word weird? Stop talking about being like that.
So. We have technical difficulties. As you can see, they're not up, and our pictures from we can hear the noises.
I guess it might
This is why calling us 1 minute before we start is not a good. No time to make sure that this.
Did they say anything?
Yeah, me too.
I text them, they text me back.
I might just be speaking to the 20 buses. All right, everybody hear me in the various places. Just give me a wave in Calgary. Yeah, shelter. Red Deer, you there? Yeah, yay! Red Deer's there too. Everybody's there. All right, good. We had some technical difficulties, so someone already left. That's great. We had some technical difficulties, so thanks for being here. Okay, so my job is to welcome you to Faith Connect. If there's announcements, I don't know what they are. And to introduce Landon. Landon is our Director of Housing and Clinic Development here in Edmonton. Hi, Roberto. Hope that's just water in that. And yeah, he's done a great job for us over the last 13, 14 months developing our housing program here, which has increased dramatically in the 13 months, as well as trying to get a wellness center off the map for us here in Edmonton. So why don't you welcome Landon? Oh, and him and I have been buddies for about 10 years now, I think. I was his pastor for a little while, so any of his heresy comes from me. All right, Landon, come on. Welcome to the fence.
Thanks, everyone. Let's just put that down on paper. All my heresy comes from Dean, not my Mennonite upbringing, Anabaptist teaching, any of that stuff. So thanks for having me, everyone, today. It's good to be here. And actually, this is my first time doing Faith Connect, so I'm kind of excited to kind of speak across Alberta in this way. But it's always interesting how when you come up with something you're going to speak on, how it kind of morphs and changes throughout the week. And I remember when I was asked to do it, I had an idea of what I wanted to do, and I stuck with that idea until yesterday. And then that idea morphed into something a little more meaningful, I thought. So I'm going to start out with a story. About 15 years ago, I just finished 2 years of school. And I had zero direction. See, I started school as an outdoor guide. I was in an outdoor education degree. I wanted to be a heli guide. I'd had a skiing career previously. And I thought, well, this is a natural way for me to, make money off something I was good at. And so I spent a semester or so in that outdoor education program, dropped it, but forgot to actually drop it with the registrars, and so I failed it. I didn't actually know the process in university at that time. And during that time, I transferred into an Old Testament theology program, which seems like a massive jump from outdoor education, heli guide, to Old Testament theology. And it was such a massive shift, but it was something I really enjoyed. But then I realized I don't actually want to be a pastor or necessarily a theologian. Number one, because sometimes the things I say might not be always helpful from the pulpit. And I don't think I want to look at books all the time and sit in dusty libraries. So I really had no direction. I'd done this huge 180 into a totally different degree, and I had no direction. So at the end of my 2 years, I decided I'm going to go traveling. And I'm going to seek after God's guidance for me in my life. I'm going to go traveling through Europe, grab a backpack, and somehow along that way, I'm going to hear God's voice, and he's going to tell me what I'm supposed to be doing, what career path, what degree, what school, all this information, what I'm supposed to be doing. And I actually believed it. 3 to 4 months later, I'm on a train. I'm on a night train from Paris to Rome. And I've actually decided to go home early because my trip has been really, really hard. I'm on a night train, and I'm in I think it's called a couchette, which is like a car that turns into like a bunk unit. And I'm on the middle bunk on the right-hand side of the train. There's about 6 bunks in this train car. And I'm in there, and I'm distraught because I've decided that I'm going to go home, and I feel like an absolute failure. I feel like I have not done what God wanted me to do. In fact, I'd spent some time moving pretty far away from God during that traveling time. And I had no more direction in what I wanted to do in my life or what God had to do for my life. I had zero direction. I remember actually starting to cry. I broke down, just like, God, what am I supposed to be doing? I devoted this time, sort of, to following after you. What am I supposed to be doing? How come you haven't told me anything? And I just remember feeling absolutely overwhelmed. Now, I'm going to finish the rest of that story later on. But this is a point that a lot of people find themselves in. I see this in my private practice. So I'm a psychologist. So aside from working at the Mustard Seed, I also have a small private practice, just working 2 nights a week seeing clients. And quite often when I'm working with people who are college age, adults, even into seniors age, a lot of people have the same question. What am I supposed to be doing? What's my vocation supposed to be? What's my goal supposed to be? What is my life going to be? And oftentimes that question is, from a Christian's perspective, is what story does God want me to live? What is that specific story that I'm supposed to find and that I'm supposed to live? Now, this is a really hard question, and it oftentimes ends in a lot of disappointment, like it did for me on the train. Because the reality is, when we seek after that story, we end up kind of dichotomizing or cutting our lives into following God and not following God. On one side of the fence, we're in God's good graces, and on the other side of the fence, we've turned away from God. And that's a very clear line that we create for ourselves when we ask, what is the story that God is going? Does God want me to live? And oftentimes it ends rather disappointingly. And oftentimes it is defeatism, where someone screws up or they do something that they don't feel is necessarily in God's good graces. And they feel defeated and they feel like a failure, and they turn away completely because they've fallen down the other side of the fence. Now, I want to provide an alternative to this, and maybe some questions that would be more helpful to ask, because I think that that's a very narrow and challenging path to walk that stops us from seeing what God is actually doing in our lives. And sometimes how that challenge of the journey is actually really important. So what questions should we be asking? Well, we could ask, really big questions of like, why am I here? Which is a good question. I think those are good things for all of us to struggle with and work through. But oftentimes it'll lead us down a rabbit hole that we may or may not come back from. It's not to say that there aren't some answers to it. But I think an even better question is, what is God doing? And that's a question not just to ask in our own lives, but ask, what is God doing in creation? What is God doing in the lives of everyone around us? What is God doing in this world that we live? And I find the easiest way, probably the best way to get grounded in what God is doing is go right back to Genesis. Go right back to the beginning of Genesis. What does God start? And through the epics, through the narratives, through the poems of Genesis, we hear this story, this grand story that God is doing with his people, right from the very beginning. So Genesis 1. I love Genesis 1. I find a way to almost preach on it in almost every sermon because I spent a lot of, in both my seminary school and that 2 years of Old Testament studies, it's really studying that text because it's so fascinating to me. And one thing that I always come back to is the structure of Genesis 1. Both Genesis 1 and 2 have this amazing structure that if you know Hebrew poetry, you know how absolutely radical it is. It's almost like a punk rock song in the sense that it's so counterculture to what is going on at the time it's written, and it's so extreme in what it's saying. It takes narratives from other stories, flips them on end, and says, no, this is what God is doing. And it's absolutely radical. And one of the cool things about it is it's laid out almost like our modern day acrostic poems. You know, we have the letters, land and lazy, or I don't know what it else stands for. It gives it by its structure, it gives us an understanding of what it means. And we look at Genesis 1, we see this structure that is so incredibly important. And this is the chiastic structure, which means we start really, really broad by talking about big things. So God creates the universe, sun, the stars, all this stuff, and then he gets more specific, until you come to the crux of what's said there. And even when you look at your English translations right now, you don't have to read the Hebrew, but even in your English translations, you're going to see something radical. When it gets to the point, verse 27, I believe it is, where God says, and he created them man and woman. There's a different structure in the actual text. Suddenly flows as flow, looks like general Bible text, and also there's like this weird micro poem. And what this tells us is this is the most important part of the text. God creating humanity in his own image is the most important part of the text. And we know from that structure as well that the parts that come just before it and the parts that come right after it are the next most important parts. This is the fulcrum point, and these are the points that support it. And when you look at both those things, lo and behold, they're both task-oriented. The first part, that comes just before verse 26, just before verse 27, verse 26 is all about being stewards, ruling over creation, compassion and caring for creation. Verse 28, being creative. Go forth and multiply, right? Both these things are task-oriented. Both these activities give us a really good evidence of like, okay, this is what we're created for. We're created to be part of God's creation, to create, be part of the creative task that God has started and is continuing. But we're also in charge, and we're also charged with the task of being stewards of this creation. So we know a little bit about where the story goes from there. You can follow Genesis through the rest of that, the next 2 chapters, and the fall of humanity happens. There's fruit involved, and there's towers. There's a lot of stuff that happens. Now, we could see that and say, okay, we lost this creative task. We lost this ability. We lost this thing. And some theologians actually do believe this. But then when you carry that structure over through and you read that whole biblical narrative of the Old Testament, you follow it into the New Testament, right to Jesus, what do we learn? Jesus is all about restoring creation. He's all about bringing about the importance of the laws that God has governed people back in the Old Commandments. He goes through in the Sermon on the Mount and talks about what is really, really important. And again, we get these super countercultural statements. Again, a little bit punk rock in the sense that it is so opposite of what the cultural narrative is at that time. And leads us to this point where we then have a little bit of the how of what we're supposed to do. The Sermon on the Mount, Genesis narrative, and all through the Old and New Testament give us this wonderful, rich history and evidence of how we can be living, what we can be living. But they don't necessarily tell us what we're supposed to be doing. Now I'm going to show a little bit my Anabaptist Mennonite roots in the sense that I don't believe in vocational specifics. I don't believe that God has created you to be a doctor. I don't believe that God has created you to be a lawyer, a pastor, a psychologist, a janitor, a tech guru. I don't believe that God has given us specific tasks that we are supposed to do. I believe, though, that God has given us a very specific task that we're supposed to join into. There's something that's going on that starts right back in Genesis, is carried through Jesus, that we are so important to be joining into. I believe that when you look at how he created us, and how God created us with the ability to carry forth his tasks, and we join into the ongoing creative tasks modeled to us through Jesus, our task is to become about bringing forth the kingdom. Several months ago, I think it was February or March or so, Dean was on a radio interview. I don't know when that was. It was on the Jesperson show. And he said something that resonated with me both from a theological standpoint, but also from a psychological standpoint. He said the root of poverty is about broken relationships. I remember listening to the interview and I was kind of like, he was a good interview. But he got to that point and it was just like, it just hit me. It hit me hard. Because that is the truth. The root of many of the things that we see that are broken in this world start with broken relationships. Whether we look at our own lives and the own stressors that we experience, whether we look at our own struggles, it starts with broken relationships and the lack of community support, the lack of people coming around us to sustain us, to support us. That disconnect with ourselves, that disconnect with systems, that disconnect with others, that disconnect with God, all this leads us to some or another type of poverty. The tasks that God has given us and the specifics that God has given us is about bringing forth the kingdom. Now, we'll go back to the train really quickly here. So I was sitting on that bunk. Sitting on the bunk. And I'm trying really hard. I'm 20-something years old, not to let anybody know I'm crying, because, that's not what dudes are supposed to do, especially when they're backpacking across Europe. But I'll tell you from evidence of being in many different dorm rooms with a lot of different backpackers, people spend a lot of time crying in hostels. You're hungry, you're tired, you've made a lot of mistakes, you're a little emotionally vulnerable. That's just kind of the reality of the way things go. So men, women, everyone cries when they're backpacking. So I'm crying there on my bunk, and for probably the first time ever, I actually heard the voice of God. I heard this voice say something along the lines of, here I am crying about God. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. That Jeremiah quote, I know the task you have for me, whatever. I don't know what God has set for me to do. And this voice comes to me, and it hits me right in the heart. And I hear God say, as long as you're looking for me and you're trying to follow after me, I'm going to be with you. As long as you're trying to follow me, the tasks you're going to be doing are going to be right on line with what I'm trying to do. You're going to do it imperfectly, but that's why I'm here. And it just gave me the sense of peace, the sense of rest, knowing that I didn't have to make some absolute right decision and follow this step-by-step path towards vocation. Instead, I had to follow the specifics of what God is doing in the big picture. That's why I don't believe in vocational specifics. I believe in God's specifics, God's plan specifics. I was sitting there, and I felt the word of God, and at the same time I noticed that the person on the bunk below me was singing, which is a little odd to do at 6:30 in the morning on the train. Why would someone be singing? And it was a nice, little, soft, pretty, sweet voice. I was like, that's a little odd, singing, but it's kind of nice. I sat there. I could hear this, and it was calming, just hearing this song in French, just the song happening. I was like, oh, this is kind of nice, a little bit magical. But then I had to go to the washroom. I've been on the night train for a while, so I had to go to the washroom. So I jumped off my bunk. And I turned around, and I wanted to just look at the lady who was on the bunk below me and just say thank you for that pretty song. But then I realized what she was singing. She was sitting cross-legged on her bunk, She had open French Bible to the Psalms, and she was singing the Psalms on the bunk below me. I just remember, like, the voice of God actually was pretty convicting enough that I'd never experienced anything like that in my life. But suddenly, to then jump down and realize that someone who I didn't know was praying the word of God below me, it just made that moment so thin. It felt like the moment, that space, that distance between me and God at that moment, there was no distance. It felt like everything was broken. Everything was open. And that stuck with me for most of my life. That's what brought me into my career path. I didn't know if it was going to be the right choice for me, but I felt like I had some skills. But I knew that if I was going to pursue it, if I sought God and what I was pursuing, that what I was doing would be created for good, oriented for good. I'll close briefly with a quote from Eugene Peterson. I like this quote because it kind of highlights both that, but also that activity we do in prayer and why we do what we do in prayer. Eugene Peterson says, the task of prayer is not to get God to do something I think needs done, but to become more aware of what God is doing so that I can participate. The tasks we have in our life aren't to find things that we want to do, that we should do, or that other people say we must do. Tasks in our lives are about figuring what God's doing so that we can find a way to just join into that stream. And we're going to do it imperfectly, but that's what God is there for. Close with prayer. Lord God, I thank you for this opportunity that we have to come together with you across Alberta. I thank you, God, that our tasks and our roles and our activities with the mustard seed are about redeeming relationship, are about bringing goodness into relationship, and are about bringing you into relationship. Whether that be subtle, whether that be explicit. In whatever way, God, we know that you are present in our lives and wherever we are in our journey. Thank you that you have given us this gift, and thank you that we can join into the stream in which you are already doing, bringing forth your kingdom. Amen.
Very good.